Hello, and welcome to our session on getting the most from variables in SQL. We're right at the top of the hour, and we are recording this session. So if you have to step away, we'll be sending the recording. And for those of you who registered and couldn't attend, welcome if you're listening to the recording. I'm Cheryl Quinlan, and I'm the support manager for both the SQL and the Showcase teams. And today we are going to talk quite a bit about variables, and it's kind of an exciting topic for me because I remember a time when we didn't have variables in SQL or Viewpoint. And now the variables are a very intrinsic part of making SQL so productive, especially for your end users. We're going to focus on a couple key areas of variables because we've only got 30 minutes and there's actually a lot more to say, especially regarding integrity tests, than I even realized. And what we'll talk about today are the integrity tests, the default values, and we're trying to sort out some of the mystery over quotes and ampersands and how we use those in variables. To get us started, we really want to know, what good are integrity tests? And what they're designed to do is to help provide integrity to what the user keys in at runtime. And there's useful ways to kind of double check that the user or who's ever running this, even if it's just for you, that you've got your fingers in the right spot or you're keying in a value for a prompt that will actually return records. And this will work whether you're in the green screen, Viewpoint, or at the browser using SQL Web Interface. We've got some basic validation that we can do. And probably the easiest are the case and the length. If you're prompting a user for a code or a state value, that value in your files would be uppercase. And so there's no sense running a request for a lowercase c and a lowercase a for California if you know they're going to get no records back. So the idea is to validate that before the request is run. We can do the same very easily for the length of a variable value. Customer numbers are typically a certain number of digits. And if someone mistakenly keyed in a number that would be lower than any possible customer number, way better to find out before you've run the request than after you've submitted it or waited for it to run and it comes back with nothing. We can also do comparisons, and we'll take a look at all of those. Then we're going to look at creating lists of values, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with building a variable that goes and makes a list, but we'll look at other ways to use those lists of values. And we'll touch on some special values that maybe you didn't realize were there with variables. We're going to do a lot of hands-on in this session, so I'm going to dive right into Viewpoint and get started. I've got my Viewpoint session open, and I've taken the liberty of creating a handful of views so that you don't have to watch me build views and we can focus on the meat of the matter of the variables. I'm going to jump into this first view that I've got created into design mode. And the first thing that I'd like to point out to you is that this view I have created in what we call a local sys connection. And what local sys means is that it's going to use the SQE or the SQL query engine, which is the faster or newer query engine, instead of using the database of star SQL. And I have chosen to use a syntax of star server. This is the newer syntax, and even though I've been around SQL a long time, as I've mentioned, and know the SQL syntax well, I'm venturing more and more into server syntax because there's some functionality there that's very powerful. And the beautiful part about Viewpoint is I don't even have to know that syntax real well. I set this entire view up through the Files and Fields tab and just clicked my way through building this view. But most importantly, we want to focus on this where clause. And this where clause has two variables. We're prompting for an order type as well as a customer number. And we've got an or condition there that we'll play with a little bit as we move along. Now, our order type is a one-position character field. It's got R, B's, or O's, but they're capital letters. And our customer number is just a 6-digit number. And we're going to look at the variables in terms of what we can do to improve the usability of these variables. So O-type, again, it's a character field, so Viewpoint defined it as a Q-string variable, but I can come here to the integrity test, and I can simply click on uppercase entries, and then whatever I key in will be forced to uppercase. I can also key in here for customer number that the length must match our variable. Now, I kind of jumped ahead and didn't really show you what would happen if I didn't do this. So we might start here and show you how good that this is. Now, you can't tell what I'm keying on my keyboard, but when I type in an R, I didn't even hit shift and it automatically made my R uppercase. If I keyed in a customer number of only 5 digits, notice that it's in red, so it's pretty noticeable that it's not a valid customer number. And if I try to run it, it will not let me pass this integrity check. It's telling me that my customer number must be 6 positions long. And so I'm going to go ahead and key in a valid customer number and show you that we do get records back. Keep in mind that I was doing an OR condition, so I'm going to get customer 100, 200, and then all regular orders from all other customers. And just as a side note, when you have, especially when you have an OR condition, or you might want sometimes to run this for orders with a particular type, or sometimes for a particular customer, you can easily change your variable to do that. And we're going to look at this null capable value. And that is one of the changes that we've recently made for server syntax views that use local sys. We no longer use the omit leading and omit trailing, where you have to fill in the values that would have to sort of be erased from the where clause. We just have to simply say, hey, yes, I want this to be null capable. And automatically it will make that star all the default value. And now when I display this, notice star all is the default. And if I want to just find out all the customers who have regular orders, I would key in an R and I would leave star all for the customer number. And because this runs, we will get all customers who have regular orders. So it's not just for one customer, it's many different customers. And the same would apply if I wanted to change this and say, okay, I want all the order types, but I really only want to focus in on this one customer. And one of my favorite things about running a view that has runtime prompts from inside the view designer is taking a look at the show SQL. This will show me what my SQL statement is going to look like at runtime. And notice here in the where clause, it starts out with this 1 equals 2, and then it says, or the cusno field equals 100, 200. We filled in that 1 equals 2 so that we could leave the OR operator or the Boolean logic operator out there, and it dynamically now will run and return just one customer. So we've touched a little bit on integrity test as well as touching on this new setting for the null. We're going to move forward with some more integrity tests and look at another view. Our next view is going to prompt for a month and also for a salesman number. Now, I know that months could only be between 1 and 12, so there's no sense in running this request for, say, a month of 13. And I know that our data allows only salesman numbers we're small organizations, so they would never be over 20. So no reason to run this for a salesman number of 99. When I go to display this, right now it lets me key in anything. And if I key in a combination that would not exist in my data, I'm going to get this message, no records returned. So the idea of integrity tests is to help at runtime validate what's entered. So for my month, I'm going to add an integrity test of a rule that says within a range of 1 to 12. For my salesman number, like I said, they're never going to be greater than 20. So I'm going to put a comparison that says less than or equal to 20. And now when I run this, if I were to miskey something, I would know immediately. If I try to run it, I get a message telling me that my entry does not meet my validation. And then I need to simply key in something that would meet my validation to get records back. So it all depends on your data in terms of what integrity test you might want to employ. And we have more to choose from. So I'm going to keep going. Our next one is going to use a list. And in this view, I'm prompting for a state value. I want to find all the customers in a particular state. I've set this up in such a way that I could key in one state or I could key in many state values. And that's why on the where clause, I've used the in operator versus an equal sign. When I do this, I would define my variable as an expression because it's not going to just accept values that are two-digit letters like CA or IL, but it will need to have quotes around those state values as well as commas separating those values. And that's why I made this an expression. I'm going to use an integrity test that's going to provide me with what we call a database list, a DB list. And I know a lot of you are familiar with this because I've seen many views out there that utilize a DB list. And the idea is that we're going to go out and get that list either from a view or from a file. Now, the reason why we let you use a view is that you might have to join records together to get the exact criteria that you want. You might have to build an expression, and it can be as complex as an expression as you'd like. Ours is a little bit more straightforward because we are simply using a state value, and I'm going to use a file from my SQLEX library. That's called stateref. It's a pretty simple file. It has a two-digit state code, and it has actually like a state description that spells out the state name. So for my field that I will pass to my where clause will be my two-digit state code, but my description, what I'm going to see at runtime, will be my text field, the longer state value. That's all I've got to do. And now when I display this, you'll notice that I've got all the state values. Now, one thing I forgot to do is to indicate that I want more than one state at a time. And so I'm going to come back to my integrity test and say that, you know what, this should be a multi-select. And yes, I have to quote those values. And so when I display it this time, notice that I will have the option to pick many states. And I'll go ahead and pick Arizona and California. Now, even though we're seeing the longer state names, I'm still have to pass the two-digit abbreviation because that's how the data matches in the file. And that's what SQL will do, is pass that two-digit abbreviation so that I get records only from Arizona and California. Okay, so that's a really good use of the DB list, and I know it's quite popular to do that. And there's no better way to ensure the integrity because we can only let the user pick a value that's in your file. Now, sometimes you might want to make your own list. I've got a prompt for a sales region, and we only have 5 sales regions, and so I might want to just hard code those region values. So I'm going to come over to the variable tab, and this is just a number and it's an equal sign. So I'm going to pick one value at a time, and I'm going to make a values list. And from here, I can simply key in whatever values I might need. Now there is a limit, and we limit this to 80 positions total. And at that point, if it's more than 80, then you've got to use the DB list, but this can be easy for kind of really quick down and dirty lists where you then are presented with only the values that you've keyed in there. And that's the only values that will be allowed at runtime. No other value will be inputted. Now, notice that I picked region 30. Now, if I'm picking only one region, I don't necessarily need to see this column that says 30 all the way down. If I come back here, I can place the variable inside of my title. I've gone into the properties where I have the title and I've got ampersand region. if I just simply save the changes I've made, when I run this again and display those results, I'll pick a different region. I'll pick region 40 this time. And when I display these results, notice that the title of my view now includes that region number. So I'd be free to remove this column from my results if I didn't need it. So that's just a nice tip about variables. Now here's another way to use that values list that you may not have thought about, and it's inside of a script. Scripts are a great place to use variables, and they allow you to prompt for more than just a piece of the SQL statement. Inside of the script, we're allowed then to use variables for parameters of commands. So I've got the execute command here, and what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I want to email this in Excel format. We know lots of people like Excel. But at runtime, I want you to provide your email address. And maybe there's a lot more going on in this script and this simple command, because maybe you had to build a work file and so on, and the final result was this email. So I've got an email variable, and notice that I've put it in quotes because my email addresses can include all kinds of things. You know, punctuation, apostrophes, periods, and as I try to resolve this command, that parameter would have to be in quotes. In the middle, it goes in quotes. I use 2 ampersands, and I'm going to define this variable as an expression just so that it can take anything, and I'm going to make it long enough for someone's email address. Now, let's say that I wanted to test this, and I'm in this designer and I don't want to type my email address out every time I go to run this. So I'm going to fill in a design time value. So when I run this, notice how it didn't even prompt me because it used that design time value, and it used my email address down here for the recipient. And so it's going to email me an Excel spreadsheet. Now, if I want to make this PC format prompt me, because maybe 1 in 10 times someone needs PDF and they don't need Excel, I can make this PC format a variable. When I do that, I need to change the format here to an expression, and I'm going to shorten it because it will only be up to 4 positions long. And I can say, well, enter star XLS or star PDF. Now, if I want to rely on someone to actually, to type that right, or not to get adventuresome and try, I don't know, HTML or something else, I could leave it like this. But if I want to ensure that they're only going to select one of those 2 options, this is a great place to use this values list, because I can say what the value has to be within this list. And now when I do this and I run my script, notice that it's using my design time value for my email address, but when I look at the format, it gives me only 2 options. So I can't get adventuresome, and I can't get myself into trouble by picking an option that isn't supported or allowed, or if I don't know the correct syntax, I don't have to guess. So that's can be used as well. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out to you, if you want to always make it, like if this is just for you and you want your default value to always be your email address, you just use it as the default value, and every time it's going to come up as your default default. And this will definitely work as PDF as well. And when this runs, notice that there's a little bit more messages here, but it will send my email as PDF. Okay, we're going to jump back into our PowerPoint for just a moment and talk a little bit more about some of the special values associated with integrity tests. One of them is called the LDA, and that stands for local data area. And you would only use this in the event that you are maybe doing something more programmatically, and an LDA is associated with each job, and this gives us the ability to write a value to the LDA. And you do that with an integrity test. If you notice over here on the right, I've done a substring, and whatever value I'm prompted for, I could just type in my name. It's going to be written to this data area in positions 1 through 20. And again, you would use that programmatically to extract the data from the LDA, or in a big process. I just wanted to point out that that's there. The other special value that kind of sneaks in there that you may not realize is for the password. Perhaps what you're prompting for is sensitive information. In the integrity test, there's a button there to click that says password, and when you key in your value, it would password protect, make it all asterisks. That might come in handy at times. Okay, we're going to move on away from integrity tests, and we're going to see how to use a default value. We touched on that just a little bit when we were in that script and used my email address as a constant. And that's, if you want the variable to default to the same thing all the time, you just type it in. You type it in right there on the default line. We also saw how you can use star all, especially when you're using that allow null. And it's also very good if you're in anytime you're using setting up a variable to be removed or to include all the values at runtime to make that default value star all. That way you know that it's set up that way. Our regular variables typically default to a blank or a 0. A character variable will default to a blank, and basically our ampersand custom that we see off to the right defaulted to a 0, but it's like a 0 suppress. And those are your kind of basic uses of an expression variable. But we can get more complicated. That default value can either be an SQL statement or a view. And this makes it really dynamic because it can be a field from a file. It can be an expression. With a date variable, for instance, your date variable will always default to today's date. Now, sometimes you may not want it to default to today's date. Maybe you want it to yesterday's date. And this example right here will do that. This SQL open paren current date minus 1 day will dynamically, whenever this is run, calculate yesterday's date. And you just put that on the default line and it does it magically. If you ever need to get a value from a file, a field in a file to use it as a default value, you can build a little SQL statement here. SQL, and in our case, we're grabbing the customer name from the customer master file. The limitation here is that the default value, the string would have to be 80 positions. So if you had a more complex expression, you'd want to create a view and then just reference that view name here on the default line. And if you do a view, we'll return the first row from the first column. So that can be kind of fun to see how good you can get that default value so that someone doesn't have to key it in. They just have to confirm that that's what they need. The last thing we can do with the default value is include keywords. And these keywords gives us the ability to retrieve some system information. And we've got 7 of them there, and probably the most useful of them is the user. And that's the one we see used most often. Sometimes, job name, you might need to pull that in. And again, it can be quite powerful, especially as you're doing things programmatically with SQL. But we're going to take a look at Viewpoint and a variable for user. I've got a view set up here, and it's a very straightforward view. And I've simply put in a variable here on the select clause that says, basically, hey, just use user, ampersand user. I'm making up this variable. Because this is a character constant, that constant would have to be enclosed in quotes. And because of that, because I'm hard coding the quotes, I need 2 ampersands so that we see that as a variable. If I come over to the variable tab, I've noticed I've made it an expression. It could either be an expression or a name, but I've used this default of star user. When I display this, Notice it defaults to my user profile. I didn't even have to key it in because it's grabbing it from the job information. And when I run this view, I'm getting just a list of customers, but I have this field with my user profile listed all the way down. The idea here, though, is if I'm really trying to do some kind of integrity testing to see who is running this request, I probably don't want to rely on the user to key in their name. And why would I want to key that in if I could do any time-saving method to do that? So what I can use on the prompt text, and I can do this for any variable, and say star no prompt. When I say star no prompt, it will dynamically use whatever the default value is to fill in that variable. So notice now with star no prompt, I don't even get prompted, but yet that field is still present and showing me my user profile. Okay. So back to our PowerPoint. We're going to just finish up our last couple minutes, and we will take a few minutes for questions. I want to just reiterate some of the rules about quotes and ampersands. It can be quite frustrating. When do you use a single quote? When do you use double quote? When do you use double ampersands? And really the rule of thumb is if your variable needs to appear inside of a quoted string, you have to use 2 ampersands. And if you can get that one rule down, you will be golden to move forward and create all kinds of variables. The other thing to keep in mind is sometimes we use 2 ampersands to prevent substitution. And I'm going to talk just a little bit more about this. The most common use of the double ampersand inside of a quoted string is if you're comparing a variable to a date data type field. If you are doing a date data type constant, like I have here, where p date equals today's date, May 19th, that date has to have slashes or dashes in it. It has to match a date format, and it has to have quotes. And without the quotes, what would happen is we would treat that as a numeric value, and we would actually do 5 divided by 19 divided by 2022. And that's why you put the quotes on there. The minute you turn that into a variable, we have to use 2 ampersands to ensure substitution. The same way, I've kind of very subtly in my script for my email address, I use single quotes around that parameter value, and then I use double ampersands because I wanted to ensure that I got prompted or used the default value at runtime for that email address. Now in unquoted strings, particularly with set var, there are some rules about using 2 ampersands. Now set var means set the variable, and it's a parameter on any of our commands that produce output, like execute, display, print, report. And typically what you're saying is I'm going to set the variable that's defined in my view with a value. And if that's in a script, your value is actually your script variable. And the rule of thumb there, if you're defining variables in the script and passing them on set var, you can't go wrong if the second part of it, which is your script variable, always has single quotes and double ampersands. That is the surefire way that no matter what you pass, we'll be able to parse correctly. The first part of this has just a plain old 1 ampersand because that's the name of the variable from your view. On the flip side, if you're doing a drill down, if you've ever used the application builder, and that's a whole nother topic in itself, which is quite an exciting topic, is we're doing the same thing. We're setting a variable from your view, but we're passing a value from the display. And that the second piece of this, the ampersand field 1, that is a field name from your drill down request, and you're passing it to the variable defined in the view. And in this case, we need 2 ampersands on the left to prevent the substitution in a quoted string, while inside the quoted string, we need 2 ampersands. We've got a great help fact on all of this with the quotes and the set vars that is available on our knowledge base on our portal. And I do hope that you will have time to take a look at that. We'll make sure we get you a link. I'm not sure if we have any questions. I know we're right at the bottom of the hour, so if you want to type them in, we will I will take them, and certainly if you had questions that I didn't have time to get to, we'll reach out to you with those answers. I want to let you know that if you've got any interest in any of our education opportunities, we do have a basic Viewpoint class coming up next week, and we also do intermediate classes. We do them in such a way that we do them in 3-hour time chunks so that because we realize you do have a day job and you do have work to do. And it works out really well to do them in 2 separate sessions at 3 hours each. Coming up next will be, for our next webinar, will be August 18th. I look forward to seeing you then. And this is our contact information. I'll hang on for a bit just to make sure that we don't have any questions, but please do reach out to either the support team, to me individually, or you can always reach us through our portal at community.healthsystems.com. I want to really thank you for taking the time out of your really busy day to join us and to hear more about variables. Hopefully we've piqued your interest, and we do absolutely welcome your questions now or later. Our support team will be ready to hear from you. I don't see any questions flying in, and maybe because it is because I talked so long. I see one, and yes, you can't. Here's a question. This is an interesting one. Can we also use logical operators like equal sign, greater than, less than as a variable? Yes. So you could set something up that says where cusno ampersand variable space ampersand variable 2, and at runtime you could decide if you want equal to, greater than, less than, and that would be actually a great place to use one of those values list so that you could set up all of the operators that would be allowed for the user to choose from. Don't hesitate to reach us if you want some help setting something like that up, because I didn't even think of that use, and that's a great use. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time today and look forward to talking to you soon.